Good morning. Oh, good morning. All right, guys, we're ready to get started. So we're going to have quite the day planned for you guys. Before we get started, though, we're going to have a quick special message from Assemblymember Mr. Hart, so I'm going to let him go first.
Thank you. I just want to welcome everybody to this amazing occasion and to also say a special word of thanks to Assemblymember Chris Ward, the new chair of the California State Assembly Housing Committee, who's here visiting today. He's an amazing colleague, really helped me in my first year in the state legislature, so I'm indebted to him. He's a wonderful friend and a mentor, and you're going to really enjoy hearing from him later in the program. But I really just want to say hello. This is such an important topic. It's wonderful that you're all here. There's a buzz in the room. Keep that energy high. This is obviously the most challenging issue the state of California faces, and having your creativity and your commitment to trying to find innovative solutions is really, really valuable to us. So thank you again for coming today, bringing your expertise and your passion, and with that, I will hand it off.
Thank you. Good to see you. Have a good time. There you go. Okay. Wow, this is pretty exciting. I don't know, show of hands, how many of you have been here before to this conference? Oh, I love it. Who's new? Awesome. I see you, Matt Fish. That's great. Well, my name is John Standring. I am the president of the Coastal Housing Coalition. I'm also celebrating my 20th year here in Santa Barbara. So I've kind of transitioned from living in Isla Vista as a UCSB student to now as the president of CHC, running a company and raising 3 boys. So what's really interesting to me personally is that housing is something you can talk about on so many different levels. You know, we have housing for people who really need assistance, people who really, really need assistance. And then we have housing for what we fight for, which is our workforce, who also really need assistance. So my goal today, and I look around the room, is there's a lot of really big decision makers. There's a lot of big players who are taking a lot of risks to make our community better. Be engaged today. Don't just come here because you get out of the office. You know, there's a really good, as Greg Hart said, there's a good vibe in here. We've got a lot of energy. We've got plenty of food, coffee's coming. Please enjoy today. Please try to figure out what you can do to make this better. You know, as a community, it's gonna take all of us. Yeah, we have policies, they may or may not work. Yes, we have developments that may or may not work. The reality is that we know we're gonna have to build. The reality is we know we're gonna have to build right. If we don't work as a community, it's not gonna happen, and we know that. So the hope is today is hopefully you guys learned something. I'm gonna hand it over to Craig Minus, who's our executive director. He gets to talk about all the fun, boring stuff, but with that, I hope you guys enjoy today.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Minus. I serve as the executive director for the Coastal Housing Coalition. It's fantastic to see everyone here. I have to tell you, we've done probably 10 housing conferences, and this is by far our most attended. So it's fantastic to see you in the audience. Thank everyone for supporting us. I have to guess that the reason we have so many people here are because our jurisdictions got their housing elements done. They don't have anything to do now. They're like, okay, I'll show up at that conference, but in all, congratulations to that. I know that's a big effort. That's a lot of stress and probably joy to get that done. And we commend you for getting those done. I know that's it's a tough effort, but you're paving the way for the needed housing in our community. So with all sincerity, thanks for getting that done. The CHC, again, John touched on it. We are about a 20-year organization. We are a workforce housing advocacy group. We were born out of our sister organization, the Coastal Housing Partnership. What we do on a year-to-year basis is largely policy advocacy, project advocacy, and education. And we want to keep the conversation of housing alive. Our realm is workforce housing, but again, our board really views that all housing is important. So events like today are not focused on workforce housing. It's kind of focused on the housing in general. And we think that's important to keep these educational events moving forward. I wanted to take a moment and thank all the sponsors. We'll be rolling all the sponsors up here, trying to get you on our blast, our websites, our social media blasts. Thank you for supporting us today. It is a volunteer nonprofit. We don't have a membership. We don't have any grant funding really coming in. So it's events like today that help us sustain. It helps us do what we're going to do next year, and that is continue our advocacy work. Am I getting feedback? Yes. Okay. So thank you. I'd like to, a couple housekeeping things. We have a number of vendors out front, colleagues of ours, sponsors of ours. We have the the South Coast Chamber of Commerce, and they're there with their Road to Recovery. I encourage you to go check that out. A fantastic effort and program and document, and I think they'll be kind of taking a road show on that later this year. We've got the County of Santa Barbara Community Services. They've got a number of informational packets about affordable housing programs, developers out there. I think you should probably go talk to them a little bit. And then we have our friends from the Community Environmental Council. They're highlighting SOMA, 3D REN, their energy efficient programs, incentive programs. So I'd encourage you to go have a look at that. With respect to formatting, many of you have been here before. It's a little different this year. We will all stay in this room. So look at your neighbor and get friendly with them. We will not have the breakouts. So all of the programming will be in here. We have our program is available by QR scan. We have codes up on the front counter. If you don't have that, we can bring those around to the tables. Our friends at the Central Coast APA have approved our program for American Planning Association credits. So we have that QR code, so all you planners out there that are doing your maintenance credits, you can get credits for that via that QR code. Timing of the day, we're trying to get you out here by 12:30. We heard in past that our program goes a little long, so we're trying to get you out of here by 12:30. We may run a little long, but that's our goal. And then last but not least, I just wanted to thank Gavin Roy Productions. He's been helping us with this event for a few years now, and he does a fantastic job, and wanted to say thank you, and we hope that you appreciate his setup. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this back to John.
I totally forgot. I was so excited about being up here. If you're on the CHC board, can you please stand up? Or if you're already standing, raise your hand. I see you, Laura. Yeah, I'm sorry. Olivia, Chris. Quite frankly, I appreciate you guys so much. Every one of us volunteer. Thank you, Krista, Barry, Ellen, Wes. If you see them today, you can thank them. This wouldn't happen without you guys. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to hand over to another board member, Leonard.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Leonard Diaz, Treasurer for the Coastal Housing Coalition. Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to introduce Assemblymember Chris Ward as our keynote speaker for this year. Assemblymember Ward represents the 78th District, which covers both coastal and inland areas in San Diego, another beautiful coastal community. We really could not have planned this any better, as Assemblymember Ward was appointed chair of the Assembly Committee on Housing and Community Development just before Thanksgiving. This continues a long resume of involvement in the housing space. In the past several years, he has authored bills on accessory dwelling units, community college housing, homelessness funding, and prohibiting discrimination in mixed income housing developments. Assemblymember Ward's current legislative priorities are on housing, homelessness, climate, state budget, and water supply issues. And prior to his election to the Assembly, he served on the San Diego City Council. So, Santa Barbara, would you please join me in welcoming our 2023 Housing Conference keynote speaker, Assemblymember Chris Ward. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Leonard. Good morning. Excellent. Yeah, I'll adapt. We're all friends here, and really an honor to be with you. Thank you for the chance to come up to Santa Barbara. You really had to twist my arm to be able to come up here and enjoy what a beautiful city and community you have here. And I just wanted to congratulate the CHC on this record attendance. I mean, I think it really underscores, of course, the community partnerships that we need to have to address our biggest crisis facing California. And of course, we feel that to different effects across the state. And it's great to know you. Really had a pleasure to meet some of your leadership this morning over coffee and over Zoom last week to really get in the details about what CHC's mission is here for the Santa Barbara County region. And I just wanted, it's nice to know because we have a lot of work in front of us. And so to be able to tap into those relationships, tap into your ideas and make sure that they are really informing both the ideas that we want to introduce into legislation, but also how to make laws better so that when those are in effect, you can put them out to good use in the community. It's why, you know, we do the work that we do. I wanted to give, I guess, a little bit more background, I guess a little more validation so you kind of know just how passionate about the housing space that I am. Yeah, I'm really excited. I think when we accepted this opportunity to come up and speak with you, I was a member of the Housing Committee, and just about a week and a half ago received the announcement that I was going to be appointed chair of the Housing Committee. So no small feats that I want to undertake because our time is limited as legislators, and I want to have the most impact that I can have in that opportunity to serve. But, you know, this taps into, I think, my own experience. I was on the San Diego City Council, chaired our Land Use and Housing Committee. Through that role, was the chair of our COC, our Continuum of Care. Down there, it's known as the San Diego Regional Task Force on the Homeless, to work on housing and service programs, but also the systemic programs about how we're addressing and resolving homelessness. And we had a lot of reforms and programmatic improvements that I think are being noticed statewide as well as sort of best practices. Certainly a big challenge that's out there in front of us, but I think that we've been able to kind of clean up a lot of the data and misinformation and the realities. I just actually spoke at their annual conference yesterday. And the sad state of the facts is, at least in San Diego, we know from that data, we're doing, you know, good work. We are housing a lot of people, we're helping and we're touching and serving a lot of people. But for every 10 that we house and help, 16 fall into homelessness. And a lot of that is tied, of course, to the increase in the rental costs that are out there and other factors that are driving that. So, you know, we continue to accept that, dig deeper, and provide more solutions. I heard, you know, a shout out there for those getting their APA credentials. But I got into this space and got into legislating also as an urban planner. So getting into helping cities with a lot of their planning documents and the zoning ordinances and CEQA work, that was something that was some of my professional upbringing, and then made a little transition into the political space. But all that is to say, I come adept with a lot of that talent base to really tackle this big issue that's in front of us. And we need those community partners, and I have a lot of those relationships down in San Diego and some in the capital community. But now I get to have this little bit bigger perch to understand statewide how we can work on policies that really are uniform and can be able to help sort of baselines lift across the state. But I'm mindful that, you know, all corners of our state have different realities and different attributes and characters that, you know, we have to kind of take into account. And in large part, you know, there's some commonalities that we have down with my home community in San Diego within the coastal zone. You know, give you some perspective, I guess. Before I was first elected in 2020, you know, I was mindful that the state didn't do a lot in the housing and community development space. They had a committee, and yeah, they did, you know, some bills here and there. But as we saw the problem grow over the 2010s, it was really left to locals for their decisions, and it just wasn't adding up to the regional and statewide effects that we needed to really get a handle on the costs around development and other factors around securely housing all of our Californians. And we had started to kind of break through, I think, a little more political will. I think what I'm going to talk about is just, my perspectives that from this Sacramento perch now, that it's going to take more political will to say yes, to be able to try new approaches. And if that's not working, then try other approaches. But it really demands us to be able to do more and try more with that local input and professional expertise, because the problem's not going to solve itself on its own. And not doing anything, I think, has even more dire consequences. But just getting into be able to say yes into some more aggressive housing policies, I think took a lot of political courage for some. And sometimes that bill doesn't pass the first time around, and you learn lessons from it, and you reintroduce it. And there was a real challenge getting to that, requisite 50%, that 41 vote threshold, to get something off of the Assembly and then repeat that over in the Senate. And eventually, I think, we started to get there, and I think a lot of my colleagues that were a little more nervous were hearing a lot of mixed input, realized that the problem had gotten, so far beyond us that they just had to say yes to more things. And so we started to pump out more ideas and more legislation, or moving the needle. But we have sacred cows, right? And some of these are well-founded and very reasonable perspectives and issues. What are we doing about labor costs? What are we doing about environmental considerations? What is the role of state-local relationships? What are we doing about inappropriate development in, climate risk areas, wildfire hazard areas? I know you all had horrible mudslides. So we've got to recognize that these are not reasons to stop things, but reasons to make sure that we are adapting our policy to address many of these co-equal goals as I see those. And for a long time, a lot of the area around the coastal zone has been excluded. We just had a special, feeling and reason to be able to treat areas differently. But I do see that as sort of, the next hurdle. Actually, I know a lot of people are buzzing in my ear that this is going to be another area that we're going to be able to get into a little bit closer, to see what can work more. We can't say no, but what can we do more to be able to make sure that housing works in the coastal zone with all of the other important attributes that we have for these communities, to address the need for affordability, to address environmental protections, access to the coast, all of the above. Mind you, I say this as somebody who, in my time on City Council, was also appointed as an alternate coastal commissioner. So I've got a deep respect and understanding for their mission and what we want to be able to see for what Californians have entitled that to be able to do to protect our coastline. But we are at a tipping point. We're beyond a tipping point where we can't have sacred cows. We can't have third rails. We have to lay everything out on the table. So I leave that as kind of just a note of what I hope is optimism, that we can break through a lot of these discussions. It's going to be a more impactful year. And on top of the work that we've already done, I'm optimistic now, assuming this chairmanship, that we'll be able to lay out some big ideas and those little fixes, and it's just going to be a very, very active discussion. Also grateful, he might have left already, but had a chance yesterday to have dinner with my colleague. I haven't seen Greg since we left in mid-September and went back to our districts. But he shared with me, a story of one of his conversations down here in the district, talking with a restaurateur and somebody he's known for a little while, and he's asked, how's it going? I mean, gosh, you've got your workers, your servers, everything has gotten so expensive. And they said, yeah, we actually have to, my employees live in San Fernando, and they have to be bussed out here at my expense. We pay them time and a half, because this is a really special employment relationship, and I put them up in a hotel. And these are the costs that our employers are having to bear because we aren't providing that workforce housing here. So what a crystallizing example, I think, of the challenge that we have here in some of our communities, and again, underscores how important and how grateful we are that you all are assembling and working, beyond today's conversation to actually get out there and act and do more to be able to provide middle income and workforce housing as well for issues like that. I had a few forays into some housing legislation that I think got me to this point. My first year, I really tried to get into coastal housing conversations with a bill called AB 500. And for me, that was recognizing, at the time, we had redistricting, but that first term, I had a lot of my coastal zone from the city of San Diego, Solana Beach, all the way down to Imperial Beach, through Pacific Beach, La Jolla, Ocean Beach, and those city of San Diego beach communities. And what we recognize is that we're trying to do more if we want ADUs, if we want affordable housing developments, and the city is approving something, but then there's this secondary review, right, at the Coastal Commission. So how do we conform our local coastal plans to make sure that if we are authorizing something in the forms of streamlining, how do we make sure that we're breaking through that conversation as well, too? And there was a lot of back and forth with that, and ultimately, it wasn't successful. I actually got tanked because of labor debates at the very last minute that we didn't have time in the Senate to be able to reconcile. But it teased out a lot of issues and stakeholders that I think informed future conversations. So fast forward to last year, we had Senate Bill 423. My co-author, Senator Wiener, I think a previous keynote speaker at this conference, was trying to extend a program that he had authored under SB 35 to produce affordable housing, largely affordable and workforce housing productions that have actually produced units. I think in the 5 years it's been in effect, 18,000 units, 75% of which were dedicated affordable. It was working. But to get SB 35 passed back in 2017, he had to take that amendment. Coastal areas were excluded. Building that back into this conversation, I think, brought everybody else out to the table. We had, some honest conversation about, from framework around wildfire, high wildfire hazard area standards as well that I know some legislators have touched in other kind of one-off pieces of legislation. We had that labor conversation too, right? At what point is something, really requiring and deserves, better skilled and trained and unionized labor standards? And at what point should we make sure that, we're having other workforce standards around prevailing wage and the right to health care and other things that are built into it, but not necessarily having skilled and trained credentials? And these have been sort of these micro issues that have killed legislation, have just absolutely spoiled the conversation. And SB 423, I thought, and especially with his leadership, broke through a lot of those conversations, including opposition from Environmental and Coastal Coastal Commission representatives who were there defending their mission. But I think that everyone saw the writing on the wall that this thing was going to pass. And it really required us to pass because it was working. So if we want it to pass, and you're over here saying, I'm not going to be at the table and I'm not going to support this or participate in this unless I get everything that I want, it might pass with you getting nothing that you want or with your perspectives absolutely excluded. It forced everyone to come to that table and really realize that, there was a way to sort of build in a lot of helpful perspective that were sort of addressing everybody's perspectives. And what came out of that was a bill that actually helped to conform with a lot of the tenets of the Coastal Act, right? Meeting some of our Coastal Commission's perspectives. It formed a framework for when, and under this development type, we are going to have this set of labor standards, and when under that higher development type, we're going to have that set of standards. And so these conversations that had previously spoiled and killed legislation in the process before were all sort of simultaneously touched, and I'm hopeful provided at least maybe a good example of a way that we can bridge these conversations and be able to get to yes on a lot of these future questions and be able to work on a lot more important legislation. Coming from San Diego, we were a city and are a city that I think we were one of the first pro-housing designation cities by the governor when that program was released. But that started with my time on city council, trying to do more to meet the moment. And so sort of working, with some of the easier issues, although they always start out as controversial. Our ADU bonus program was a one-of-its-kind ordinance at the time that, was producing and eventually gained popularity and ended up, it's still more aggressive than the statewide allowances that we're offering right now. But, these local policies are informing what we can do statewide, and then that's just going to have even far greater impact regionally and, of course, for the totality of needs that we have across the state. So it didn't start out as popular, but it's generally now is very popular, although we are seeing some creative overuse of that. And so, we're revisiting some of these conversations. San Diego allows, under certain conditions, unlimited ADUs, thinking that, of course, there's going to be a theoretical max, and then one person decided that there was an area in a transit, really actually close to transit, that they were going to do a primary unit, and then 130 ADUs on site. And creative, essentially a very different way of doing an apartment building. But hey, that's workforce housing, and it's right next to the transit line. And you know, we want to make sure that, you know, we're being honest, I think, with, you know, the work that we're trying to do, so we don't have these wild stories and are going back to some of the ghosts and demons that people are fearing, and trying to make sure that the policies that we're putting out there actually conform to the expectations that we're having as we're debating those policies. So the day that I was announced housing chair, and I'm very grateful for Speaker Rivas for that appointment. Again, it taps into my experience, and it's what I was built for, and I think the time the time and the place that, you know, I was called to serve. The day it was announced, immediately everyone's saying, so what are we going to do? What's your goals? What more are we going to do around housing? And I'll tell you the same thing that you know, I said just a couple of weeks ago, is that I'm not sure exactly what those specific bills are, right? I've got 119 colleagues. We've got a lot of advocacy organizations. We've got a lot of great ideas out there. And I just, you know, took over the gavel. But, you know, we've got a big challenge with this. We've got, you know, at least 1 million unit shortfall in the state. We've got to make sure that we're having a comprehensive approach. We're going to have a very tough fiscal year. If you heard the news recently, but actually is updated this morning, the LAO came out with a very dire budget shortfall that we're projecting that we're going to have to solve as a legislature. Be it the idea that, you know, increased, and I was grateful last year, even under difficult but maybe less difficult times facing us, we did not regress on our commitments to delivering housing dollars to California communities. That was a key priority for us and the governor, and so we'll definitely try to toe the line despite, you know, some of the headwinds that we're facing. But we have to make sure we're working with our private sector partners as well. What works out there, what pencils out? How do we incentivize some of the investment? How do we make sure that we are appropriately addressing regulatory forms that work but aren't overreaching and causing undue effect out there, and complicate other things that we also care about? How do we make sure that we are uniting a lot of these community partnerships that can help us actually solve some of these complicated issues? These are all really staring at us right in front of us. So we're working right now, and actually I don't even know who my colleagues are on the committee yet. I'm so far a committee of one, but we will hear soon who's being reappointed or newly appointed from the Speaker's office. And from that framework and a lot of our other colleagues that are introducing legislation to come before the committee, I think we'll have, you know, the work plan in front of us. But I had a chance this week to meet with our committee staff. Great people, a lot of expertise and talent there, both in and out of the legislature, and committed to, I think, aggressive and successful solutions that we can pass. So we are working on some overarching themes. As kind of my planner brain, I like to start high level and really think about the strategic goals, and then making sure that the work that we're doing is actually supported by those base goals. Housing production, lots of it, and what's going to make things work out in the real world to actually produce more units. So that, of course, is an overarching theme. We talked about, you know, SB 423, SB 4 allowing, it was the YIGB bill. It was allowing faith-based organizations, nonprofit organizations to be able to build more on their lands if it's 100% affordable and have ministerial improvements. You know, I've been able to do some work with affordable housing developers to be able to just streamline and make things a little simpler with state bureaucracy on the front end. I know that time is money, and so if you're waiting around 2 or 3 years and trying to get through iterative hurdles through HCD, it sometimes makes things not pencil out or not worth a venture taking. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, all of these solutions, both small and large. Yes, you heard earlier, you know, getting into the work successfully had signed now the community college district bill that built on what K-12 districts are able to do right now to provide teacher housing on their lands. I think you all know that, you know, until then, dedicated educational spaces were only permitted to have educational development for uses, and so, but we need that workforce housing, and I think that was just one, you know, sample or model of what we want to be able to do to provide broader workforce housing development for the broader community. Working on renter protections has been a big theme of ours. You know, we were able to have a bill signed last year by Assemblymember Haney to cap security deposits at 1 month's rent, which, as long as we know, has always been a really good standard, but it's been prohibitive for people to be able to get into that unit, as we've been seeing landlords increase a lot of their upfront costs, and now we're also seeing that translate into move-in fees and other creative fees. So we've got to be fair, of course, with those who are renting as a form of housing, and making sure we're not pushing them out of our communities. I do think balancing climate conversations with housing is critical. Our patterns of development across the state over the last 3 decades have been sprawl. And that has induced a lot more vehicle miles traveled, a lot more congestion, reduced quality of life for those that are trying to find that affordable housing place to purchase, right? Farther and farther away from where they work, more expensive infrastructure to be able to build. And so all this is to say, you know, we need to have an honest conversation across the state of California about recognizing that housing policy and climate policy are linked. And what are we going to do to make sure that we are working on things simultaneously? And I had a bill last year that, you know, was a good overture for that, AB 68, that would really try to help to incentivize. And it was a partnership between housing advocates and environmental organizations who typically, you know, oppose something or come on maybe very late in the process, but on the introduction of a bill, they want to be a part of that solution. And so how do we make sure that we are allowing for that, you know, ministerial approval and some of that streamlining where it makes sense, close to jobs, close to community infrastructure, but then also make sure that we are sort of deprioritizing and as a last reserve, you know, continuing these patterns of sprawl. And we really should have that conversation that will continue, not in AB 68's form, but that'll be able to continue to work on sort of linking those policy areas. And then funding is a key issue too. We have a couple of bills that are going to be coming to everybody now, voters to be able to consider in March. Well, you all can start building in February when you get those ballots in the mail. But Proposition 1 is going to make sure, I think they're calling it, something not tense, treatment not tense. So we've got a little about a $6.8 billion bond to be able to help with supportive housing needs and treatment services as well for those experiencing mental health crisis or otherwise at risk or experiencing homelessness. And I think that's going to be building on 10 years of real world experience about what's not working under MHSA and trying to reform that as well into areas that we think are working in California's context, but adding the housing components as well. And we will be debating in November. We'll see if it clears the legislature whether or not to add a housing bond question to the voters as well for middle income housing and workforce housing development. So we got on the funding side those questions out there. We had 2 measures that had passed the legislature that I hope will give strong consideration. They don't have numbers yet because they're going to be on the November ballot. But ACA 1 was a labor of love for my colleague, Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry, our local government chair, that is going to allow local governments with your city council's vote or your board of supervisors vote to be able to reduce a special tax for infrastructure, affordable housing, and other specific purposes from your 2/3, 67% to 55%, which is on parity with school bonds, right, for school facilities. So we thought that was a really good parity for a lot of examples that have clearly demonstrated, you know, majority support by voters. Sometimes, you know, clearing 60%, but just, you know, never being able to meet that very, very excessively high barrier. But the first question is to whether or not voters want to be able to reduce that for a certain set of purposes that we need here in our community. And so we believe that question was ripe to go for the voters. And then a second one was trying to work around, you know, what we are seeing on some, again, tying back to local decisions, some special interests that want to raise the bar, make it even harder for local governments to be able to raise those revenues. As you all know, if you want to consider a general tax question, or you have some select fees in there to be able to pay for services, there's been some wild ideas out there to be able to try to reform those and really raise the bar and put those questions before voters. And interestingly, one of those attempts in 2018 was used sort of as a legislative, I think disgustingly used, as a legislative hit to get a moratorium on a soda ban tax, because that was one area's, like, you know, special interest, and they didn't want you local governments thinking about a soda ban, or sorry, a soda tax. What was inherently unfair to me and undemocratic, little d democratic, was that, you know, you had this idea that we were somehow going to change in our Constitution the requirement for supermajority votes, but it only takes a majority vote to pass, right? I say, and I put forward, and it's going to the voters, if you want to move something in our Constitution to a supermajority vote question, you should meet the same threshold yourself. It's fair. Piss some people off, but hey, you know, I'm not up there to make friends. So we have a lot in front of us, and I just, again, really grateful that you all have come here today to be able to hear some of the really smart conversation that's going to be guiding this region. I want to thank you for the work that you do every day to meet all of our shared goals. You know, we're in this as a partnership, and I'm really looking forward to getting back up with my colleague Greg Hart and others on January 3rd to be able to resume the work that we're doing. But I expect our partnership will continue, and we're going to be able to do a lot of great work together this year. I'm looking forward to your questions here today. Thank you again for having me all the way up from sunny San Diego, and you know, really appreciate the conversation that's ahead of us.
Wonderful. All right, we're going to run. Thank you, Assemblymember. We really appreciate that. We have plenty of time for some Q&A. So if you have questions for the Assemblymember, please raise your hand and we'll get you this mic.
Good morning. Do you think there'll be an opportunity to change the legislation or develop new legislation that will include affordable housing and workforce housing as a priority for the coastal zone? So change the Coastal Act essentially and put housing back in as a priority use?
Right, so we talked about that when I was sort of working through variations of that first bill I mentioned, AB 500. And that gets into a lot of tension of whether or not it should be the purview of the Coastal Commission to have oversight of affordable housing. They originally did, and they can point to a lot of great projects and examples where they made sure that that was importantly included in a city's local coastal plan or as part of a project approval. So I think that there is value there. We get into absolute conflict with local governments who don't trust the Coastal Commission, right? Or think that they are going to overextend that authorization, right? And think about, you know, conditions or on a project, right, that might be too excessive and ultimately complicate or make a project fail. So I think it's worthy of that discussion. I think we need all partners to be at the table right now. I'm open to that, and as I was back then, but I think we're gonna have to rebuild that trust, you know, between entities that have fought for decades against each other's interests to be able to allow additional authority, I guess, on that space.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks so much for coming. So almost everything that's being discussed is on the demand or on the supply side. Mm-hmm. Is there any discussion about demand side support like rental assistance? So, and the reason why I ask is California is spending significantly more dollars on addressing homelessness and low-income housing than the federal government is. Yeah. And Section 8 currently, as we call it, you know, housing choice vouchers, reach 1 in 4 of eligible people. So it would seem that supporting the demand, even including workforce demand, through some sort of rental support would be an efficient way of increasing supply and solving this.
So a couple things. I know exactly what you're talking about in the San Diego context. I know we have our, you know, the 5th largest homeless population in the country. We're 22nd in federal funding per capita for housing choice vouchers, right? And that disparity has grown over the decades because of old formula. We almost got there, our federal representatives almost got there in 2016 to reform and update on a going forward basis that equity, because California deserves its fair share of this assistance. They didn't quite, you know, they ran out of time, administration changed. It absolutely, went into the trash can. So we have some renewed interest under the Biden administration to be able to pull that back out and revisit it and try and get that done. It's going to take an act of Congress, of course. which isn't easy these days, but we are supportive of that. Meanwhile, the state has been doing more in direct assistance towards rental support. Certainly, you know, as we're receiving federal support during those COVID years, that we were able to dedicate that aside. I will say, though, that, you know, it's all the right things to do, and in the context of everything else that we're working on funding education and public safety support and infrastructure dollars, it needs to be in that mix to some degree, too, because everything is so challenged here in California, and we should be doing more. But that in and itself, subsidizing and supporting our way out of an issue is not going to solve, right, the bigger context, that we have to work simultaneously on the supply side questions to be able to help stabilize those curves and have market pricing actually stabilize too. So it's both for me.
Doss Williams, I'm a county supervisor here in Santa Barbara County. I just wanted to reiterate what my planning director put about the coastal zone. The people that it will piss off hate you anyway, and they are going to be upset about all the coastal related housing. But to give you an example, in my community, the coastal zone goes right up to the mountains. So all the developable land in the city of Carpinteria, all the developable land outside of the city of Carpinteria in the county is all in the coastal zone. And they're not unique. There are many communities around California this holds true, and they all think that they are exempted from the need to produce housing.
Thank you. It's great to see you again. Supervisor?
Yes.
Yes. Congratulations. Absolutely. And like I said, I had those communities in the city of San Diego, you know, clearly zoned for, appropriate for residential development, but the fact that we have, you know, this sort of secondary review adds that time and sometimes unnecessarily adds, you know, those additional conditions, gives that additional opportunity for disagreeable neighbors to, you know, sue and really stop, you know, helpful projects to move forward. So I'm not Pollyanna about kind of, you know, what we're facing there, but I listen. And I do listen with a lot of those neighbors. I've been meeting locally down in my district this fall with a lot of people that don't believe in the supply side challenges that we have, that are genuinely concerned about neighborhood impacts as they've grown to invest in and love, and what are we going to do about infrastructure to support things. All, you know, there are nuggets of, like, you know, valid concern there, and so that's not lost on me as their representative too. But yeah, I'm not gonna let, you know, some overarching yelling and screaming, you know, stop me, and I'm gonna try to give the support and the encouragement to a lot of our colleagues right now to break through that inertia too.
Thank you for coming out and speaking today. My question is about the California Dream for All. The first round went in 10 days. My understanding is that there's a supplemental 200 to 300 million that's going to be in the next budget. Can you speak, will there be more after that, and will the process change so that it's a little bit more fair and equitable in that distribution, because it went so quick and a lot of people didn't even have a chance to apply.
I know, it's so oversubscribed, and I think that gets to the point, right, about, you know, sure, we want to be able to do down payment assistance. We want to be able to support, you know, the opportunities for home ownership. It doesn't stretch very far, even when you think about a $300 million investment, which is a big number. That's not insignificant. Pricing is expensive, and that what they're able to access there only stretches with so many households. So I, you know, understand it got you know, subscribed up so fast. And again, this is going to come down to a resource question, especially facing a very difficult state budget. Is that available for another one-time allocation or not? It's not that it's not important. It's not that it doesn't need to expand, but it just may, the money may not be there compared to other state priorities as well too this year. I don't know, but we'll have to go back and build that into our conversation.
Thank you very much. A question related to the labor provisions in many of the state laws. Sorry, right here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So many of the streamlining bills that we see that are geared toward creating either by right ministerial or streamlined processes in some way come with a lot of these labor provisions as well. What we're seeing is, especially right now, projects are barely penciling as it is. So the effectiveness of those bills is really not on the table for many sites, even if it clears all the eligibility criteria that those come with as well. Projects will go through the process, go through a CEQA compliance determination, and then you get labor unions coming out and threatening lawsuits. How do you reconcile those labor unions, kind of bring them to the table and create a little bit more effectiveness with some of these bills?
So I agree, and I don't like that anybody is using a CEQA or kind of any process that's out there to meet their own ends, right? That's a reason to be able to stop something by getting over into this area of policy discussion, like I actually care about the environment, right? But on that project, I don't, and we're gonna let that go through because we got ours. I find that, just transparently difficult to swallow. That said, there is righteous conversation to make sure that we're not paying chump wages for people to be able to build the things that we need and then end up having to live 100 miles away, or in my case, be bused in from Arizona. That happens in reality too. And I fully appreciate it's, the spreadsheet that it takes to be able to make something pencil out, or you don't get a project at all. And labor is a big, part of that cost. It's one of the bigger parts of that cost column. So, kind of talking around, I think, all around this issue area to sort of acknowledge, all of these different points in the conversation. But we have to, if we're thinking about state policies, that's why I think it's helpful to be able to set the rules in place for what our expectations are for some of those labor standards, to be able to make sure that Californians that are in construction and are doing that hard work can actually afford to live in the communities that they're building that housing, maybe even that unit. And that would be the trade-off then to sort of remove that local opportunity to be able to perversely act and sue and delay something based on CEQA. So it's, I think SB 423, again, was a really good template. It may not be the right sort of mix of everything to address the issues on every single policy, but it's all baked in there. And that's important for everybody, including developers, because you know the rules going into a decision.
Thank you. James Cariaco, City of Goleta. For decades, local communities like Goleta used to be able to rely on state funding through redevelopment to do things like provide affordable housing, but just as importantly, perhaps more so, the infrastructure to support it, the roads, the bridges, the flood control improvements, et cetera. What are the prospects for redevelopment coming back anytime soon within the regular budget? Because I know the governor vetoed a prior attempt because he said it wasn't in the regular budget. The reason why I ask is at a certain point we can't just keep expecting developers to be philanthropists and fund affordable housing as just a way to mitigate getting their projects approved. So how do we get more money into the system, not only for the housing but for the infrastructure that supports it?
I think there is going to be a moment that redevelopment deserves to come back. It was working. Mostly, it was abused sometimes, and those were some, really awful examples that we saw across the state. And at a time of historic deficit and difficult decisions under Governor Brown, we understand why it ended up falling. But with that fell, decades of accrued investment locally. With that dedicated 20% set aside, affordable housing developers told us this is absolutely going to crash the opportunities to be able to start new projects, and they were right. And that was competing with, are we going to close schools, and are we going to do all these other horrible, so there was a lot going on in 2011. That said, I believe it's right it was working. And so learning from where some of those abuses were, how do you build in those guardrails so that doesn't happen, but how do you get this running up and running again to be able to help local communities with that guaranteed local resource. So to your point, we're not relying elsewhere on private sector mandates. EIFDs, I think, are infrastructure-based, kind of offshoot of that, and that's starting to kind of grow impact as some of the, we did one in City of San Diego in 2017, and so now you're starting to have annual growth in revenue that is supporting some of the infrastructure that we want to see for some of those communities, and we could be looking at expanding that kind of model for housing specifically. There have been a lot of legislators that have been talking about what we call redevelopment 2.0. It just hasn't, I think, kind of come together as it will be a big issue, but a righteous one, and I think we'll keep it on. I'll keep optimistic about it happening.
I think we have time for one more question. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer McGovern, and I'm head of the Housing Trust Fund. And this is both a comment question. A lot of great legislation has been passed over the last few years for more resources, but it seems that the bulk of the funding goes to the large population centers in LA and San Francisco, and areas like the Central Coast get shortchanged. And we're the third least affordable housing market for a small metropolitan area in the entire country. And we get a pittance of the state funding. And I think part of the issue is you guys do a great job at the legislative level, but there's no allocation by region based on the differences in the state. And it ends up at the regulatory level with the bureaucrats, and they do their best, but the competitive scoring always favors the large metropolitan areas. So that's something I hope you guys can take into consideration in the future. Just because we have a small population, I think our entire population might represent one district in LA, the need is critical. And we're different. The Central Coast is different than the large population areas. So I'm hoping that can be addressed in the future.
Thank you. We'll take that, certainly mindful. We do sometimes make sure that there's at least a baseline for every county that's out there. That's something meaningful for everyone to be able to work with. And sometimes this often comes down to, the politics of representatives, and we've got, a lot of representation from the Los Angeles area. Hey, what does Santa Barbara and San Diego have in common? We got to deal with LA. And we got our water rate issues with Met, and, we've got, these tussles too. Even though we're the second largest city, sometimes regionally, with this reality that we have to think about. So I'm with you on that. We want to make sure that everyone's got access to, something, modestly proportional to be able to work with. And at the same time, we'll have to work on, some of those political relationships to affect that end. Thank you, everybody, for a robust discussion. I look forward to working with you in the year ahead. And good luck today.
All right, let's give them another round of applause. Thanks for making the trip up here. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Guillen. I am co-chairing this conference this year with John. And right now I want to invite Ann Towbes and Steven Amerikaner onto the stage with me. So I'm going to present the 2023 Michael Towbes Excellence in Workforce Housing Award. The CHC uses this award to remember Michael Towbes' service to the community. He was a chairman of the board of directors of the Towbes Group and Montecito Bank and Trust, a civic leader, and a beloved philanthropist. As a developer, he recognized the need to support the community where he lived and worked. Each year, we grant the award to the person, project, or policy that embodies Michael's service. And I want to invite Ann to say a couple words about Michael for us.
Thank you. Hello to all you hardworking, well-meaning, wonderful people who make this place a better community for all of us. I know Michael's smiling down on us. He loved being a builder. He had three parts to his life. He was a philanthropist, a builder, and a banker. For the banking, he said, I'm really not a banker, I'm just a very good borrower. But he did love being a builder. He wasn't going to be a builder. He went to Princeton. He was from Washington, D.C., went to Princeton, first one in his school to go to Princeton, and studied civil engineering, went on to MIT for just 1 year because he got a little tired trying to build bridges. He kept thinking he wanted to be involved with housing. So he went back to tell his dad the news, and the father said, well, I have some advice for you. If you want to be a builder, make sure you build for poor people because there are a lot more poor people than rich people. Probably good advice. And he was very, very proud of the Towbes Group and all that they have accomplished. And I know there are a few people here today who have been with or still are with the Towbes Group. So I applaud you as well for keeping his legacy going. Steve, who was a family friend. We knew and know his family socially. And when Barry called me and asked me to be involved, I said, of course, for Steve. Do anything for Steve. I know he's very, very deserving of this award, and I think we'll hear a little bit more from the horse's mouth. Thank you so much.
So the cat's out of the bag. Steve's getting the award this year. Before we give him the award, I wanted to say a couple of things. Steve has been a leader in this community for the past several decades, from his time as city attorney in the 1980s to his private practice at Hatch & Parent and Brownstein, and his founding of the Coastal Housing Coalition in the late 1990s. He's acted as land use counsel on some of this community's most important projects, most recently of which is the expansion of sanctuary centers, a much-needed 34-unit supportive housing project, which is set to break ground next week. So it's my great pleasure to give him this award as I consider him a mentor and a friend, and let's give him a round of applause. You want me to hold on to that for you?
We do?
Yeah, I'll keep it in good hands.
Can I put that in?
Yeah.
What do I do? How do I get this? Okay.
Will not do it?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe it's a little high.
There you go.
Well, thank you. It is delightful to be here today. I'm so grateful for this honor, and particularly for having Ann Towbes here to present it, and to be in the company of the previous recipients of this award, Detty Pikert, John Campanella, the city's AUD program. To be in that company and to receive an award named after one of my personal heroes, Mike Towbes, is so moving and so important to me. And I want to thank you, Ann, for devoting yourself to this and for being here today, and to CHC for making this possible. Mike is a personal model for me because of his integrity and his commitment. When people think about Mike Towbes, they think about all that he accomplished. And those of us who got to work with him saw the way that he did it, the integrity and the commitment that he brought to everything that he tackled. That's something we can learn from. So as you can see from the program today, much of the conversation today concerns workforce housing on the Central Coast. And to set the table for the rest of the morning for that discussion, I'd like to look back a little bit and reflect on how we ended up with Californians moving to Texas because they can't afford housing here. To say it briefly, we spent 50 years digging this hole. And we shouldn't be surprised if it takes a lot of work and commitment to get ourselves out. Some of you weren't born when this story starts. So think of the next few minutes as your grandfather reminiscing about the past. Feel free to doze off. In the good old days, you've heard that sentence before. In the good old days before 1970, you could buy a parcel of land, you could look up the zoning, design a house to meet the setback requirements, get a building permit over the counter, and go to the lumber yard. Done and done. If the lot was big enough, you could get a quick lot split. No public hearings, no objecting neighbors, no homeowner associations, no wildlife advocates, no construction labor unions, no soil contamination reports, no coastal commission. During the 1970s, all that started to change. CEQA was adopted by the legislature. The Coastal Act was adopted by the voters. The Supreme Court expanded the scope of CEQA to cover not just public agency projects like freeways and water treatment plants, but private activities that required a public agency permit, which, as you know, is just about everything. Most significantly, the process for getting building permits went through a radical change. The state legislature and the courts began to require public hearings and the exercise of discretion for the building projects, where earlier those projects were approvable simply by checking the boxes. The role of planning commissions vastly expanded. Neighbors and others were now entitled to written advance notice. Administrative appeals to city councils and the Board of Supervisors were created. By the 1980s and 1990s, we began to see the impacts of this explosion of process. One WAG formulated a riff on the old General Electric tagline from the 1950s. In California, process is our most important product. Housing production slowed down and the cost of building new housing went up. The state began to fall further and further behind in building housing for new families. We saw all of this happening in Santa Barbara. Employers reported difficulty in recruiting employees or workers from other communities. Local companies told the same story. A recruit would be offered a local job on Friday, would go house hunting over the weekend, and would call on Monday to decline the job offer. A group of those local employers started the Coastal Housing Partnership to address the problem of recruiting and retaining employees. The partnership set up programs to help local workers get into ownership by helping with down payments, closing costs, broker commissions, and other obstacles. After a few years, the partnership realized that it was inadvertently making the housing affordability problem worse on a macro level by enlarging the pool of prospective buyers and thus driving up home prices. So the partnership started focusing on the production side of the equation by advocating before local agencies. The Coastal Housing Coalition was born. This housing conference is one of its marquee events. Of course, the housing shortage has been a statewide problem since the 1980s. And so it was just a matter of time before the pressure for statewide solutions would reach Sacramento. Starting in 2016, the legislature began to take a new look at the obstacles to housing production it had erected since the 1970s. Again this year, our state government has taken a number of meaningful steps, including 56 housing-related bills passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. Meanwhile, in Santa Barbara, a parallel shift has been taking place. In the 1970s and 80s, our political leaders were largely people who already had housing. They appointed people to the planning commissions and other agencies who already had housing. There was no voice for the people who didn't have housing because those people didn't live here. And so there was little sense of urgency about addressing the problem. That started to change. A member of the Board of Supervisors told me how she had been deeply skeptical and typically in opposition to new housing projects. Then her college graduate daughter came back to Santa Barbara and took her mom on a weekend search for an apartment. The following Monday, the supervisor had changed her mind about the need for housing. If you look at the people on the city councils and the Board of Supervisors today and the people they have appointed to the Planning Commission and other boards, you will find a different mix. There are younger people, renters, folks from minority communities, new arrivals. These are the folks who are experiencing the housing shortage on a daily basis, and their voices are now being heard. The appointment of Brian Barnwell, which was announced in the paper this morning, is certainly a great move in that direction. And there's some green shoots as well. The Housing Authority recently unveiled a housing project on State Street at the building formerly occupied by Sur La Table. That project was the result of an extraordinarily generous donation from Jason Yardy. In a similar vein, Yardy Systems, the company started in the 1980s by Jason's father, Anand, announced a plan to convert a large office building on Fairview Avenue to workforce housing. Ben Romo, another one of my personal heroes, is working with Yardy on that project. Are there other business leaders who have the resources and inclination to follow Yardy's lead? Do you have relationships with any such folks? This is the moment to open up those discussions. At the same time, there's so much more we need to do to get out of this hole. The problem is too big and too urgent to believe that somebody else is going to solve it for us. As the state legislature and many others recognize, one of the best ways to reduce the cost of new housing is to speed up the approval process. Our 50-year obsession with process is costing us dearly. Our local public agencies and construction industry should work collaboratively to find ways to shorten the permitting process without sacrificing the quality of the project. No prospective solutions should be off the table. That work can begin immediately. Finally, we need more people who are committed to finding solutions in positions of power and influence. So when the county or one of our cities announces openings on a planning commission or an architectural review committee or any other local board, ask yourself if you are ready to step forward and make a difference. I firmly believe that you're here today because you want to be part of that solution. Thank you for that commitment.
Congratulations again, Steve. Well deserved. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ann. And thank you for being here. We are going to move to a break. Our next segment should start around 10:30. You'll hear a very in-depth legislative update. So don't go away. Use the restroom. There's restrooms located in the back. There's restrooms located outside the foyer. More food, more coffee. We'll see you in about 15 minutes. Thank you.